Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our third and last panel about space capabilities and tools. My name is Nicola Petrelli, and I'm a professor of strategic studies at Roma Tre University. First of all, I would like to thank the Nato Defense College Foundation for inviting me to chair this extremely interesting panel. I have a background in strategic studies which is quite broad, and I've been working the last few years even on emerging technology. And that's why I'm very excited to discuss this topic with distinguished panelists with impressive backgrounds. Space capabilities and tools are essential and will be even more important in the future for intelligence, for deterrence, diplomacy, and of course for military and policing operations. However, there is a tendency in public discourse and even in scholarship to discuss space capabilities in terms of great power relations. This is natural because space capabilities and tools are expensive and they require certain kinds of infrastructure in order to be developed and employed. And therefore, it is particularly appropriate to discuss today space capabilities and tools in relation to non-state actors and criminals and trafficking, these kind of issues which very often go overlooked. So let me briefly introduce our first speaker, who's Dr. Pascal Legaye, who will talk about civil-military space convergence and emerging threats. He's an aeronautical and space engineer and holds a degree in geography engineering, a master's degree in image processing, and a doctorate in international relations. Intelligence officer of the French Ministry of Defense, is a specialist in international space relations and in particular an expert on strategic issues related to satellite imagery. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I have some slides to present. I don't know if it's possible. But first, Ambassador on the Nato Defense College Foundation, thank you so much for your invitation. And I would like, if possible, to start with the first slide. Yes, to give you an ESA perspective concerning this, the role of space, in particular new tools and capabilities. Yes, and with this key idea to accelerate the use of space in Europe. In other words, to focus collective energy on unifying programs. These programs are called accelerators, considering space as an essential enabler to face multiple global challenges. So ESA defined 3 accelerators and 2 inspirators. I will come back on these inspirators elements as well. The first question, what is an accelerator? So it's a new concept of action for Europe. That means concretely to focus on responding to urgent social needs, but also to upscale existing space investment to the next level. This is a user-driven approach, and also to strengthen European leadership on STEM. So STEM is an ESA education program for the younger generation and the growth at large. Important also to attract new funding sources, private funding, but also usually we have funding from research ministers from the different ESA member states, but also important to see if other ministries can also contribute to this funding. This is an ongoing work and discussion at the moment with the member states. But also to combine the strengths of ESA, EU, and member states. The fact that in the Lisbon Treaty, Article 189, the 3 major space actors in Europe are EU, ESA, and member states, but also with the international organizations and the private sector. Concerning the first accelerator, this is, by the way, the priority defined by the ESA member states. It's space for a green future. And this, that means the main purpose of this accelerator is to get this carbon neutrality by 2050. That is a net zero carbon emissions in 2050. So this accelerator resorts to different instruments. One is called DT, Digital Twin of Earth, for simulation and prediction, but also to rely on breakthrough technologies, for instance, quantum gravimetry, artificial intelligence, of course, and to develop what we call green information factories. And what is important as well is a strong partnership with industry. The general purpose is, of course, for a better understanding of climate change. The second accelerator, I don't know, there is not a priority order except for the first, green future, but the other one is called Rapid and Resilient Crisis Response. The problem to be solved is the following. Europe is facing an expanding, evolving security challenges and also interconnection between the different crises. And there is clearly a need to enhance the means to act for European citizens' security. You have probably in mind these floods and fires during the last summer. And this is part of the security scope. You have some examples on the slide. Also the geopolitical instability. We have a terrible example at the moment. But also all security issues, cybercrime, for instance, and others. So what is needed? What is important is to act urgently, to have a faster crisis response, and moving from reacting towards a real-time management and automated proactive risk mitigation. So we are considering at the moment the possible synergies, but also the gaps to be filled. In terms of synergies, you have some examples on this slide concerning artificial intelligence network to connect and enrich Copernicus and Galileo capacities, not to see these flagship programs in a separated way, but to have to interconnect their data and to have a bigger effect at the end for the users. Also, this secure connectivity flagship, probably you know that Commissioner Breton announced a couple of months this new flagship for the European Union. Gap fillers, we have also this, you have a list of cognitive cloud computing, interconnected, fast, programmable commercial Earth observation constellation, and of course, Internet of Things. So what is the solution proposed by ESA? Again, is to interconnect systems and objects to get the most of these different data sources using Earth observation satellites, for instance, but also other capacities such as HAPS, high altitude pseudo-satellites, but also with this, the fact that we need to secure the connection to guarantee integrity, availability, and confidentiality of data. And again, this is clearly user-driven. The end user are the key target of this ongoing process. Concerning protection of space assets, this is another accelerator, protection of space assets. So it's obvious that we need to protect our systems, and we are focusing on two main threats in outer space. The first one, you know this problem, the debris issue. At the moment, you have the estimate of objects in orbit. For instance, for the object between 1 and 10 centimeters, we have around 1 million such objects orbiting. So protection of space assets. Important also to design, develop solutions to remove debris on clean space. And ESA is currently working on these capacities, and in particular with the Swiss company to clear clean space. We signed a contract with this company. Space weather is also another issue we are taking into consideration. I would like to conclude because my 5 minutes are over now. The Inspirator. So it's a poetic name, but concretely that means we have 2 Inspirators. It's for farther horizon. One is the European human space exploration. As you probably know, this is a topic currently discussed at European level with the member states in particular, to get an autonomy in this context for the human space exploration. It's a way to position Europe for the next space exploration frontiers, but also a key issue of freedom of action in space, and also in commercial terms to unlock the commercial potential in Europe. And finally, this last Inspirator is the IC Moon Sample Return Mission. IC Moon samples from Jupiter and Saturn, and there is also in this context the outstanding science return. This is a big way to develop science with the breakthrough technology development as well, and it's of course a way for a source of inspiration and to accelerate what we call in ESA voyage to 2050 to implement this big objective. I think that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Pedro Gorenzo, who has 20 years of experience in areas linked with surveillance, space technology, maritime digital services, and innovation. Mr. Gorenzo holds a Master in Science in Environmental Engineering from the University in Lisbon and a Master's in Business Administration from the Lisbon MBA in collaboration with the MIT Sloan School of Management. And he will talk about surveillance of illegal trafficking instruments and trends. Please.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. So the European Maritime Safety Agency has 5 main pillars of its activities, so 5 main strategic priorities, and one of them is surveillance. Our surveillance activities include drones and then satellite-based services, which will be the focus of my small talk. We provide support to member states, so member states organizations and other EU agencies, in a wide range of function areas. So law enforcement is a big one, but customs, environmental crime monitoring, fisheries control, maritime security, these are all activities where we support our member states with the services that we provide. And what type of problems are we trying to address? So maritime surveillance has, and particularly when you try to address all these function areas and with focus on law enforcement, you're talking about monitoring large areas of interest, so big areas of sea. Your targets are permanently moving, okay? Ships move, that's fine. But they are actively trying to evade detection, particularly criminals. It's very expensive to cover large areas. In some cases, you cannot cover them with conventional assets, even if you have the funds to do it, because of restrictions, and if you want to monitor certain areas where you cannot deploy an asset. And so what you have are very, very broad requirements and very different activities that you need to focus upon. Usually the primary aim is to interdict the activity, to detect and interdict. And then the longer term, so this is the short-term perspective. And the longer-term perspective is to create a deterrent effect on the activity. So if you surveil constantly, you send a message that, we need to do it differently. So because we're talking about that reactivity on these, let's say, criminals. So for this, EMSA operates a wide range of satellite-based services. We focused mostly on near real-time or quasi-real-time activities, meaning whenever satellites pass over an area, We need to analyze, because vessels are always moving, so it's very interesting to know what was there yesterday, but for an operational user, the value is very reduced. So our focus is to acquire information, to analyze the information, and to provide it to the end users in minutes. So our timeline is usually 20 minutes. 20 minutes of a satellite pass, information is acquired, analyzed, the specific elements identified, and this is delivered post-analysis to the end user. This is, of course, creates some challenges in terms of supply chain, but it is doable, and we've been doing it for quite some time. We rely mostly, in terms of Earth observation, on radar satellites, synthetic aperture radar, also very high resolution optical satellites, and we use commercially available data. So we have contracts with commercial providers that we use to deliver our services. An important part of this is that when delivering a specific product or service, we need to merge space data with non-space data. We need to be able to understand exactly what the maritime information that, for instance, vessel information systems that we can merge with the space data to give exactly what the user wants. And this is an important aspect, which is all our products are tailor-made to the users. It's not one size fits all. There are so many different activities that you need to really talk with the user, understand exactly what is the need, so that we get our toolbox and then we construct exactly the product that they need for the specific use case that they have. Then, of course, besides the fusion of different types of data sets, we heavily rely on automatic behavior monitoring algorithms to issue alerts, because at the moment there's so much information, so much data that the user is drowning in this data. So algorithms are not a solution. I think one of the panelists previously mentioned that. It's indeed, if you don't work with the user, if you don't understand the use case, it's garbage in, garbage out. So it's this tailoring of the different algorithms that creates meaningful alerts. And of course, new capabilities. Everybody's talking about the new capabilities, new space players. Yes, we all want more data. Yes, we all want the new space radar constellations. Yes, we all want the very high resolution, 30 centimeter optical new assets that are currently being deployed. But we also need better information. So we need to extract, it's not only more data, but more value from the data that you have. So we need to focus on insights that you can extract from this data. You need to create a higher level of information that you're delivering, focused on exactly what the user needs. And then more on the technical side, when you're looking at all these different assets that you can use radio frequency detection, you can use very high resolution optical, you can use thermal infrared, you can use synthetic aperture radar. At the moment, there's some sort of silo in this use. Okay, there's ways to break these silos, but they're still very clumsy in the way that it's done. So orchestration of all these assets is fundamental. And I think for the future, the more we increase the number of assets we have, the more interoperability is needed, and the more automatic orchestration of what we're doing between the different providers. I want to be able to use a very broad radar to detect certain hotspots and then focus automatically with another constellation, or use radio frequency detection of a cell phone in a certain area and then be able to use a high resolution optical to actually figure out what is there. So these are the type of challenges that we will have from the, let's say, the primary perspective. That is, we all want more data, we all want to extract more value, but we're all operating, at least in my agency, with limited budgets. So the budget here is a essential component. We need to be very precise in the way that we select the different tools in our toolbox to fulfill the needs of our users. And that's it on my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being extremely timely. Okay, I will introduce now our third panelist, who's connected with us via Zoom, Ambassador Sorin Ducau. Ambassador Ducau is a Romanian career diplomat with long-standing experience in transatlantic and international relations and particular expertise in the field of emerging security challenges and the impact of new technologies upon security. Professional background reflects a quite rare blend of technical and political studies, holding a degree in applied electronics and computer, political science and international relations, and PhD in international economic relations and institutional management. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm deeply honored to be part of this conference. I'm sorry I could not be in person in Rome and promised to be next time, and would like to greet Ambassador Alessandro Mito Rizzo, dear colleague from my Nato years, as well as Pascal Leguet, my predecessor, the former director of the European Union Satellite Center. And with this, let me jump directly to the subject matter that I wanted to put forward. And I will understand that you will handling the few slides that I will have prepared in advance. Okay, next slide, please. So about the European Union Satellite Center, I want to start by highlighting that the Satellite Center is one good example of an autonomous entity of the European Union and of its member states, because it's an intergovernmental agency, very much like, for example, the European Defense Agency, which was created 30 years ago in order to provide strategic situational awareness to decision makers and to support also foreign policy decisions and also security-related evaluations. Initially, it was an agency of the Western European Union, and for the last 20 years, it's an agency within the European Union with the main aim of supporting common foreign and security policy. But this is just the main aim, because SATCEN is also mandated to maximize the relationship, the synergies with other EU activities in the field of space and security. And while its core mission is that of providing security from space to Earth through geospatial analysis, it has also a supporting mission, that of providing security for space, since it has the role of the front desk, so the interface with users of the European Union Space Surveillance and Tracking Consortium. So it's a bit of an operational crossover. Next slide. What we're doing in terms of core activity is, of course, the analysis, but also we're investing a lot in specific capabilities aimed to support our core mission, also in IT, like algorithm or artificial intelligence, and we're very much invested in training and also cooperation with other EU bodies, with member states and other key partners. Next slide. A lot of involvement in supporting crisis management through geospatial analysis, from humanitarian aid to EU missions, to supporting our the agency for border security, and including other organizations like the UN or the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Next slide. I'm really want to highlight that the cooperation with other key players, by the way, European Space Agency, ESA, one of the important partners, but a lot the Commission with a number of components, the Copernicus program, Frontex, EMSA, Horizon Europe, Defense Agency is key, because it's I think nowadays cooperation is a key ingredient for the advancements of our activities, and frankly to pushing the technology development for space and data management related to space data forward. Next slide. This just shows a number of areas where we have support operation engagement. I would, for the sake of time, push for the next slide to go into the more future trends. Next slide. I think we are now in a new paradigm. While years ago the main focus was to get the images needed with the right resolutions and frequency and so on, with the mega constellations and the huge development today, the big challenge right now is actually to be able to manage the ocean of data in an efficient manner and to make sense of this data, which is at the core of what SATSEN does. Next slide. So while there is a Earth observation gold rush driven by cost reduction, by new sensors, by the massive constellation, increased resolution in terms of quality of images, but also in terms of revisiting frequency, the possibility to use algorithm to distinguish shapes from aerial or space images and make the activity of the analyst much more efficient. All this is pushing user demand towards much more complex needs in terms of also at the same time with much higher speed and also with the need to be able to merge together more multi-sources of information and apply analytics in order to be efficient. Next slide. Next. This is just an example of how images that are representing blue water can actually depict shapes of ships and flag them with different colors, making the life of analysts much more easy. Next slide. There are significant trends in user demand that are driven by space technology and IT technologies. And next slide. The idea is to change the business model for something that was focused on analysis of number of images read to a certain geography to multi-source automatized analytics and interactive access of users to this constant monitoring and analyzing. So it's like moving from a pipeline approach, ad hoc approach, to a much more interactive and continuous and sometimes proactive approach by flagging specific trends that could lead to mitigating difficult situations. Next slide. The innovation is at the core of the response to what users need, and I would just highlight that all the interlinkages between the possibility to use better resolution and better revisiting time to the better use of IT technologies and also advanced quality control approaches is leading to a completely new ballgame in this field of Earth observations based by satellite sensors. Next slide. This is just some examples of research and innovation at SATSEN that allow for interactive monitoring of sites. Next, I think.
Ambassador, sorry to interrupt.
But we'll be able to respond to more questions of interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, thank you to all the panelists. I think that there are two issues that emerge from your contributions. One is the issue of integration of different technologies. And the other is about operational effectiveness. Therefore, I would like to start the discussion by asking two broad questions to all of you. The first is about to what extent do you think that advanced data technologies and space technologies create a more serious problem of technological integration at the level of systems. And the second is about operational effectiveness. Mr. Gorenzo mentioned very interestingly the concept of deterrence, which I think is very relevant in applying space capabilities and tools to non-state actors and criminals and trafficking. A concept that has become quite popular in scholarship in the last couple of years is that of deterrence by detection. That is the idea that these capabilities enable to keep terrorists, non-state actors, criminals, whatever, under constant surveillance, and therefore enable enhanced deterrence. So I would like to ask you to please elaborate on this concept and your professional opinion about to what extent this is a true opportunity. Dr. Guguet, please.
Yes, about this first point you raised concerning integration of different technologies, different capacity systems. At the moment, it's clearly an issue we are considering, because I would say the usual approach was in the recent past, to consider different capacity system, different technologies in a separate way. Now the main challenge is to integrate, to interconnect these different capabilities. Again, to get the most of these different technologies and innovations, and this is a key point. So at ESA, in any case, we are creating integrated teams, and also we put in place what we call the multi-domain activities. This is a new approach. The new ESA Director General decided to break this silos approach and to have a more transversal approach, and to with this integrated integration objective between these different activities. So this is a generic answer to your question. And you mentioned the second point, if I understood correctly, concerning the constant observation. Also the fact that to guarantee, to ensure this persistent or even permanent observation, we need to develop, it's already the case, what we call the constellations of small, micro, nano satellites, but also to combine these satellites with other systems. I mentioned the HAPS, but also drones and even ground sources to ensure this permanent observation, also to guarantee a certain real time to provide data, information, services in due time to the relevant end users.
Thank you. Mr. Gorenzo?
Okay, on the first question, I think it's a clear consequence of this, and I like the term gold rush of Earth observation. It's indeed a gold rush. The market is expanding dramatically. So that's a natural consequence, that you start having proliferation of different satellites, different constellations, mega constellations. So that's step one. So step two would be to create interoperability paths to make this work. At this stage, the industry is not there. We do interoperability. We do it on our side. And I think it's the wrong place to do it if you think about the supply chains. It's not the customer. I'm a customer of satellite surveillance service, and then of course I'm a provider to my users of higher value products. But at this stage, the industry is far from the level that it should in terms of maturity in what concerns interoperability between different satellite constellations from different providers, from different industry players. It will get there. I think it's a step-by-step approach. I think it's a good problem that exists, because having more data, okay, when you drown the user with data, that's not a fantastic way to deliver information. But it's not the case. That's at least on our side. It's not the case of what's going on. We are doing this filtering, but indeed it could be much more efficient if it was done upstream. If the maturity level in terms of interoperability at the industry side would be already there. So that's, I think, for the first question. Second question, deterrent effect. We have clear examples that deterrent effect works in some use cases. So we're running a service called CleanSeaNet, which detects polluting ships all over Europe. And we've been running it for 15 years. And we see a continuous downward trend of pollution. And this is proven. Number of pollution events per million of square kilometers monitored, systematically going down since the service is up and running. Now, is this applicable to all use cases? Probably not. There are areas where we're not so efficient still in our activity. So we're getting very good, and also due to the availability of data at detecting targets. We're getting very good at characterizing targets. We're not fantastic still in tracking targets, particularly in an open ocean. And we're much less fantastic in predicting where they're going. So predictive analytics is also something where we need to go. Again, we know that if we have the right tools, we could create a deterrent effect. I have my doubts that we could create a deterrent effect in all use cases, meaning when you think about drug trafficking, probably you can create a deterrent effect to a type of trafficking, but basically you're shifting the problem to another domain. But focusing only on the maritime side, there are use cases, yes, where it will probably work, and in the near future we'll be able to do it. There are others that are much more complicated, and we need to see. We need to have more tools. We need to have more thinking about how to create this long-term deterrent effect, because your adversaries are constantly changing.
Thank you. Ambassador Ducau, with my apologies again for interrupting you, the floor is yours again.
But you can see we were on the same mind. I was at the end when you mentioned. So very to the point answers to the two questions, because a lot has been said before. I do think that we are at a moment where upstream computing and data management is already a preoccupation and a trend. It's very useful that it happens as such. Secondly, I think with all the complexity, I am a strong believer in a utility to integrate the different sources of data, not just from different satellite operators, but also combining with collateral data, not from necessarily from space assets. It could be from, I don't know, high altitude pseudo satellites or drone imagery or even open source and so on. And this is at the core of the good quality analysis. And I also underscore the multidisciplinary approach that should be stimulated both as institutional level, but also in the teamwork. And the second question was actually referring to the value of this constant observation for transparency, and also I think deterrent effects have been mentioned in the context also of this crisis. I do think that transparency in itself is useful, and it's good. It can really even before saying that it deters, potentially changes the calculations of some in entering in military or kinetic operation. I think it can also deter other type of manipulation, like information manipulation, fake news of all sorts, and it's a trend that we will see continuing, and needs to be probably used and managed even better.
Thank you very much. Okay, we can open to Q&A here and in our virtual audience. So we can start with the room, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlo Trezza. I'm a member of the Nato College Scientific Committee. My question goes, I would say, mainly to Mr. Legai and also maybe to Ambassador Ducaro. Mr. Legai, you mentioned briefly the question of removing debris, space debris. I would like you to elaborate a little bit more about this activity and how you think you can remove these debris, having in mind, however, that the biggest threat which causes debris is and would be the anti-satellite weapons, of course. So one of the ways to remove this problem would be to forbid anti-satellite weapons, which are being developed by some countries. There was, yeah. Shall I stop here?
Yes, please,
Okay.
so that we can have more room for questions. Please, Dr. Legai.
Yes. So it's thank you for this question. To remove debris, we have different levels linked to your question. First level is a technical level to define, to develop solutions to remove this debris. We have different possibilities. If you different companies are studying, I mentioned this Swiss company, ClearSpace, with a system to catch debris in orbit. It's an option. We have different other options with a net to also to collect debris in orbit. So this ESA initiative is the first such an initiative in the world. This at the moment ESA is taking care of its own satellites and potential debris, not the others at the moment. And this is an important point is also the legal dimension in this context. At the moment, what is important is to have a binding regulation in space, and also to build responsibility, transparency, to identify the responsible entities concerning the presence of debris in orbit. You said that as that anti-satellite capacities are the main source of this debris in space. It's probably true. We have at the moment 4 nations with this ASAT capacity, the US, Russia, India and China. And also the launchers are responsible of this debris situation in space. So the law is, the legal dimension is also an important part. At the moment, we have this still the 67 treaty in outer space with different conventions following this treaty, but nothing else. The EU initiative concerning this code of conduct in outer space for outer space activities. At the moment, there is still pending initiative because some important spacefaring nations are no interest to sign such international agreement. By the way, the EU initiative was not binding. We need to have a more constraining regulation in space, also to limit this debris. So this is on the spot my reaction to your question.
Thank you. Ambassador Ducaro, please.
Yes, let me jump on the last aspect, because on the issue of collecting space debris, Pascal Legué has explained how technologies are evolving. I do agree that ASAT weapons and demonstrations of ASAT capabilities are extremely destabilizing. And I think there should be a priority in any initiative of generating responsible behavior for outer space. Of course, there are other ways to disrupt the activity of satellites, jamming, spoofing, and so on. But this aspect of anti-satellite experiments and demonstrations should be addressed as a priority. I think there is an experience in arms control that led to something positive, for example, through the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty that has decided to ban the tests of nuclear weapons. So we're not there to ban any, but because those tests have been proven to be so damaging and destabilizing, in the end, there was enough political will and commitment to come to such an agreement. I think more, public outreach should be done on this aspect. Let me mention another initiative of the EU, the so-called 3SOS, meaning for the sustainability, security, and safety in outer space. This is a public diplomacy initiative aimed at bringing awareness to the global public opinion about this issue and to stimulate political push towards generating responsible behavior.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question from our virtual audience. How does in space sector our identified risk define mitigation plans, considering and not forgetting sustainability, ethic, and effectiveness? So if you want to say a few words, each of you, you have 1 minute each. Please, Mr. Gorenzo.
On my side, I think I'm not, so our agency is not a space sector operator. So we are consumers of space-based services. So our perspective of risks is much is much driven by the supply chain perspective. So we look and are we providing very low latency services. So we need to understand what are let's say, the issues in the critical path of our service provision. This implies looking at all the satellites that we use, all the ground stations that we contract, creating redundancies, and ensuring that contractually, as much as possible, we can increase both the quality and resilience of the services that are provided.
Thank you. Dr. Gorenzo.
Just very quickly, this question probably deserves a dedicated conference. It's a very large question with many possibilities. The starting point are the risks. And the risk, we have a long and endless list of risks. We have a financial risk, technical risk, security risk, etc., etc., etc. And for each category, we can derive a mitigation plan, etc. Sorry. Okay, so I don't have more to say about that.
Ambassador Ducaro, please.
Well, I frankly don't have more to add either. I mean, this subject, either we take and dissect one by one, or we really focus on the key aspects which have been already presented. So I'm not going to repeat them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much for this exciting panel. I leave now the floor to Ambassador Minuto Rizzo to introduce Honorable Piero Fassino.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you to the chairman and to the panel on space. It is not very easy to make, how can I say, for the public, general public, understand the interesting issues of space. But now we are coming to the end of our afternoon, and I am very honored to introduce Honorable Fassino for the concluding remarks of the evening. Piero Fassino is of course, you know it, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Chamber of Deputies, but besides that, he's a person who has always been interested in international affairs, and as far as I know, in the Italian political arena, he's the person who comes out as the most relevant one in international affairs, to my mind at least. Honorable Fassino, please.
Dear panelists, dear friends, allow me, first of all, to express my sincere thanks for this invitation, which confirmed the friendship and esteem that binds me to the Nato Defense College Foundation, to Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo, and to all the researchers who are carrying out such invaluable and irrepressible work, not only in research and in the depth analysis, but also of organization of what we might call security culture. Today's meeting is part of a series that began some time ago to gather analytic input and practical suggestions for defining the new strategic concept to be adopted in Madrid next June. Before addressing the substance of issues dealt with by the various panels, I cannot fail to mention the extraordinary nature of what is happening around us, and at this very moment, with a new war in Europe, a war of conquest, a war in breach of international law, a war against freedom, justice, and peace among the nations. And all signs tell us that we only know who our friends are in times of difficulty. Well, it has been precisely at a time of difficulty like the present that we have witnessed the friendship, unity, sense of solidarity, shared methods, objectives, and attitude of the members of the Atlantic Alliance. NATO is present. It is a responsive organization that has demonstrated how uniquely invaluable it is, dispelling any suggestion of its being brain dead. NATO is present in the Ukraine crisis with its prudence, but also with its organizational and logistical dependability, a force for that end, for security, at the service of a dialogue and a multilateralism. NATO is present as a force for deterrence and ultimately as a force for peace. These are important merits that must be preserved, and above all, made clear to the world outside. World and Europe public opinion must clearly see that NATO has not worked and is not working to destabilize Europe, but the exact opposite. The enlargement of NATO, which is always a matter of free choice and never an imposition, is a guarantee for everyone and never a threat to anyone. As I have said on other occasion, quoting President Biden, we are not what we are by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. And the prudence NATO has demonstrated in this day, shown by the choices made by the Biden administration, show that NATO is not at the service of an imperialist plan, but of a project of a multilateral collective security. And of this we must be mindful and proud. After these introductory remarks about the present extraordinary environment, I will now address today's agenda item, which is by no means totally unrelated to the crisis in Europe, as we shall be seeing. Previous panelists have painted a detailed and well-documented picture of these threats to global security and stability related to illegal traffic of non-state actors, the particular condition of instability in the Indo-Pacific area, and the possibilities offered by space technologies to control and fight against criminal networks. These are complex topics, which involve geopolitical issues and legal issues, foreign policies and criminal law, as well as, from a governmental viewpoint, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministries of Justice, precisely the two departments in which I have served in my political life. I therefore approach this speech of mine with a particular sense of personal participation and commitment. As has been rightly pointed out by earlier speaker, we are witnessing rising instability in the world today. Instability caused by new and renewed assertiveness of the part of various regional powers, but also by non-state actors and especially by terrorist and criminal organizations. In this area lying between the seas, the Mediterranean, the Gulf of Aden, and the Gulf of Guinea, namely to area some geopolitical analysts call the enlarged Mediterranean, that we find the greatest concentrations of global crises. In 2021 alone, 4 countries in the Sahel, Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Sudan, experienced coups d'etat. In Chad, the president was killed. Somalia remains a failed state, and Ethiopia has once again been plunged into a brutal civil war. In the same region, Islamist terrorist organizations are flourishing and contributing to widespread insecurity. All this instability is being funneled into Libya, contested by warring factions that are unable and perhaps unwilling to stem the flow of illegal migration and people trafficking. Where statehood or the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force, to quote Max Weber's well-known definition, is weakened security, freedom, and the rule of law fall by the wayside. When the monopoly of the legitimate use of force is lost, criminal violence and illegal trafficking flourish. Now, should an organization like Nato address the problem of the threat to stability and security posed by criminal organizations and all the commercial and financial ramifications, the answer that we have heard emerging from this meeting is the affirmative. And as such, it must be part of the new strategic concept now being drafted and defined. Geopolitical and financial analysis must go hand in hand. There exists a two-way relationship between political security and financial security. One can threaten the other and vice versa. We can see this in action today with the trade and financial sanctions imposed in response of the grave threat to European and international stability brought about of the invasion of Ukraine. I am reminded of the third core mission mentioned in 2010 strategic document, namely the concept of cooperative security. In that case, we were talking about partnership and cooperation policies developed and still to be developed with dozens of countries and international organizations around the world. But in view of the data and the analysis we have here so far, we must conclude that this cooperative security has so far been insufficient and has to be strengthened and enhanced in a number of ways. Crime knows boundaries. Trafficking has no respect for borders. But even when state authority does not exist in failed states, states are not guaranteed that crime does not exist, but failed states and certain guarantees that crime and trafficking in drugs, counterfeit goods, arms, and human beings are expanding and greatly contributing to insecurity and instability. In the past, after the end of the Cold War, we questioned the role of NATO as an international policy force. Then, faced with a threat of Islamic fundamentalism, we experienced a period of exporting democracy. This phase has seen partial success, but also setbacks and real defeats, as in Afghanistan, for example. And it is precisely a country like Afghanistan that is once again becoming both an authoritarian country opposite to the rule of law and an exporter of illegal trafficking, such as the drugs trade, and consequently an exporter of instability in the final analysis. We are witnesses of a paradoxical situation. Both authoritarian states with a despotic regime or with a monopoly of the arbitrary use of force and violent state with not monopoly of the use of force and the ideal environment for criminal organization to flourish for commercial purpose. In the past 12 years, we have looked at the helplessness of the growth of violent state and authoritarian state, and with them the growth of trafficking. It is therefore urgently necessary to re-establish an international rule of law. This concerns the personal security of citizens, but also their social and economic security. This link must be made clear and obvious. We must make the world public aware of the vast resources being stolen every year from state and therefore from citizens in the form of lost taxes revenues that could be usefully allocated elsewhere. Taking resources away from crime and returning them to healthy economy for social inclusion, for combating climate change, and for innovation and research will be a new way of interpreting NATO's strategic mission and the service of global security and multilateralism. Such a mission could give rise to a great alliance between NATO and world public opinion, between NATO and civil society committing to protecting and defending the rights of citizens and workers throughout the world. Then there is yet another front of illegal traffic, human organs, one of the world's legacy of the age-old split between the rich and the poor countries, where healthy people in the poor countries supply body organs to sick people in the rich countries. This illegal trade also deserves to be tackled by NATO. And I would therefore like to briefly mention a region that is all too often forgotten, Latin America, where criminal gangs still run rife and the illegal drug trade is thriving. We would also develop a strategy to join forces with this region and fight against organized crime. On this point, I would like to raise one more point about the European Union. When approaching an issue was geopolitical and geostrategic potential is very clear to us, such as the matter of non-state actors in international trafficking, we cannot fail to acknowledge the progress made by the European Union with the establishment of the European Public Prosecutor Office in June 2021, and the end of a process that began in 2017. The Union has equipped itself with a very high-level coordination body to combat fraud and money laundering, one of the preferred financial systems of international organization crime. The new strategic concept must certainly include a more cohesive and better structured synergy between NATO and the European institutions. I say this as an Italian, an Atlanticist, an European. We are in a different phase to where we are to 2010. When the current strategic concept was conceived, the European Union had common policies and totally different self-awareness from what it is now. The COVID-19 crisis, and now the crisis in Ukraine, have created a different perception of the possibilities and the effectiveness of European cohesion and unity. The coordination of trade policies experienced as a result of Brexit of health policies experienced as a result of the pandemic, and now of defense and energy policies are stages in an irreversible process of maturation. This makes it urgent to adapt a coordination and cooperation between NATO and the European Union, starting with the action of an office such as European Public Prosecutor's Office, SAP Interpol and Europol, but we also know that these structures are insufficient. If we want to be effective in the fight against global organized crime, our intelligence services also need to talk to each other, and this will become possible precisely with a greater, more integrated, more structured involvement of NATO. I would like to conclude by briefly mentioning the Indo-Pacific question. 12 years ago, there was no AUKUS, that is to say, no military defense alliance for that region of the world. I firmly believe that NATO must initiate constant and structured coordination with AUKUS, overcoming earlier misunderstanding because, as has been amply illustrated, the growth of authoritarian states in the region, in addition to Afghanistan, Myanmar, the problem of international stability in Indonesia and the Philippines, and the persistence of an assertive and aggressive attitude of the part of China. All this point of crisis required countries that believe in freedom, democracy, and the rule of law not to let things slide, but to exercise a role in steering, fostering, and effectively safeguarding this principle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Onorevole Fassino, for your remarks. Thank you very much. We are arrived at the end of the day, I think, and I would like to thank everybody for your attention. And the reflection that comes to me, I see that you are, I think, about 100 persons, and to be here for many hours to listen to all these things that have been discussed, it means that you are very patient, or the discussion was very interesting. Perhaps both things together, I think, and I hope so. So, buonasera a tutti e grazie per essere stati qui fino adesso.